All right, so let's take a couple minutes and point out some of the key features and components of Jouley. Since we don't have an engine to heat coolant, we've got to have coolant heaters. So we've got two high voltage electric coolant heaters. These heaters deliver coolant to 3 pumps. So this pump right here is strictly for battery thermal management, which we'll talk about briefly. This is for our powertrain because we also deliver coolant to our inverter, our traction motor, and our air compressor. And then there's one over here on the side. This pump delivers the coolant to the cab and the interior of the bus. So 3 pumps delivering coolant for different reasons by way of 2 high voltage electric heaters. So when we talk about Proterra batteries, there's quite a bit to these batteries. Very proprietary design. They use a term called passive propagation resistance. And what that does, if you look at this long battery pack, inside that battery pack are small cylinders. Inside these cylinders are a number of stacked up batteries. The batteries are kind of like a AA battery on steroids. So what happens if there was a battery failure, it's contained in that cylinder and will not affect the rest of the battery pack. So it's strictly proprietary to Proterra, huge safety feature. Obviously, when we went to an EV partner, safety had to be at the forefront. These cases are made of ballistic aluminum. We've been asked several times why Jouley doesn't have a skid guard under the batteries, because the batteries themselves are a skid plate. They are dual 110 kilowatt hour battery packs, stacked one over top of the other, in between the frame rails. The batteries went through extensive crash testing, fire testing from a combustion engine vehicle running into them, puncture testing, blunt force, manholes exploding into the bottom of the case, and all passed with flying colors. It's a really durable battery pack. If you look under here, these are the high voltage cables that connect to our charge port. We talked about battery thermal management. So one of the things that's key to the life of any EV vehicles is battery temperature. We don't want the batteries getting too hot. We don't want them getting too cold in cold weather conditions. So we've got one pump during the winter months that will circulate coolant through the battery packs on what they sit on what's called a chiller plate or a warming plate. And in the summer when it's really hot, there's a high voltage air compressor under the hood that we'll point out to you that acts as a chiller unit. So it will actually chill the coolant that circulates through the battery packs to keep the batteries at an optimal temperature. Right behind the battery packs, you'll see our inverter. The inverter converts the energy to turn our traction motor here, which is made by UQM. And behind our traction motor, you have a very durable 2-speed Eaton transmission or gearbox. If we continue down the back of the bus, we're going to walk behind the rear axle. And you're going to see on top of the skid plate is our high voltage air compressor. So the air compressor, of course, goes to an air dryer. It delivers the compressed air to traditional tanks that are mounted between the frame rails. When we talk a little bit about the maintenance on Jouley, there's far less maintenance on this bus than there would be obviously on a diesel bus. The compressor itself has a canister element filter that should be changed roughly every 4,000 miles. The compressor also has an annual oil change, and there's 2 internal filters in this that would be done annually. This does not need an HV3 certification to perform. So we'll go back up to the battery packs as we continue to talk about maintenance.
Talking about maintenance too, you mentioned HV3 training, Brady. What kind of certifications are required to perform maintenance on Jouley?
So right now, we're performing training all around the state. Daniel Drug, our service trainer, has 4 locations to go that receive Jouley. He is giving them HV1 training, he's giving them HV2 training. But in order to do what's called decommissioning the batteries, you have to be HV3 certified. We have not rolled that out to the customers yet. So in the first year to 2 years on Jouley, any maintenance operation that requires HV3 training, we'll be providing the labor for free for that. We're going to be on site with you to perform. One of the operations that does require decommissioning is an annual battery desiccant change. So if you can zoom in here, you're going to see on both batteries, there's two plugs, one on each battery, and then there's a plug on the opposite end called salt plugs. And along the entire length of the exterior of this battery pack is a long desiccant. So we remove the plugs, we pull the old desiccant out, we insert the new desiccant and put in new salt plugs, and that requires an annual PM. The only thing back here that needs PM is your Eaton transmission, and it requires a fluid change at 100,000 miles. So pretty simple. I do want to show you over here on the battery pack. These are your MSDs, or manual safety disconnect. So when you're doing any high voltage maintenance on the bus, these have to be what's called decommissioned, and it's simply you remove the MSD shunts to make the batteries inert. There is one test we perform on the high voltage junction box to make sure that there's no stray voltage left in the system before doing anything high current related. There's several ways you can de-energize this vehicle. One is the manual service disconnect, but the high voltage loop can also be turned off by your low voltage battery disconnect, the actual ignition key, and a disconnect on the high voltage junction box, which we'll take a look at in just a second. So let's start lowering Jouley down because we want to show you some things under the hood. All right, let's take a peek under the hood. So what would normally be our engine bay is now more of an equipment bay. One of the things you'll see immediately when you open up is this large motor right here. That's our electric motor for our power steering, which supplies fluid, or supplies energy to the pump, I should say. This is the air compressor that works the dash air and the chiller unit for the battery thermal management system. And you'll also see we have two large devices here called variable frequency devices, 1 and 2 right below it. The top device is what supplies power to all of our high voltage powertrain equipment. So we're talking about our power steering motor, we're talking about our air compressor, everything that either used to be gear train driven or belt driven now has to have electric energy to power them. Up here we have our vehicle controller. It's constantly monitoring what's going on in the bus and sending that information to our dash cluster. Below it is a telematics unit. Proterra uses a telematics called Apex, where they can remotely dial in and view any fault code information that the bus may have. And then in front of that, we talked about battery thermal management. We have a battery charge controller. So it's constantly looking at temperatures, the energy that's in the batteries, everything that we talked about to keep the batteries at temperature. And there's 70 different sensors approximately in each battery pack that are constantly monitoring the condition of the batteries. You'll see we have a traditional radiator, nothing really changed there. You'll see that our low voltage system is the same as any C2 you're familiar with, our bulkhead module and power distribution modules. Power steering reservoir all looks the same as any C2. So we'll walk around the other side. Same surge tank as a traditional C2. This component you see here is called the high voltage junction box. You'll also see that it has a manual disconnect that you can lock out, tag out for safety. Inside that box are all of the relays and terminals that transfer the high voltage energy to components around the bus. And that concludes our component walk around of Jouley. So now that we've talked about Jouley a bit and looked at a lot of our major components, let's go for a ride. So to start Jouley, we're going to turn our key to wake up the low voltage side. Then we're going to go to the run position. 1 to 2 seconds to the start position. We'll get our green light, which means we're ready to go.
So as we've seen, under the bus, under the hood, Jouley is definitely different than a traditional diesel bus. Is there anything different about driving Jouley?
From a driver perspective, they're going to notice that the cockpit on Jouley looks very similar to any C2 in their fleet. Obviously with a few changes to the instrument cluster, because we don't need to read engine data. We're going to be looking at things like battery state of charge. It does give us our coolant temps. You'll find that when you drive Jouley, not only is it really quiet, but it has a lot of torque. So one thing that we like the drivers to focus on is that when they accelerate with Jouley, we want to ramp up to speed very slowly, and we also want to anticipate our stop and release the accelerator. You'll feel Jouley slowing down without any surface brake input, and that's when the regenerative braking cycle happens. So we can actually put energy back into the batteries on a regular route.
You can tell that it's definitely quieter on the inside. What about when you're coming to a student stop? Is there anything to alert them that the bus is coming since it is so quiet?
Yeah, that's a good question. They actually put noise emitters in the front and rear of the vehicle. So that as we drop below a designated speed, the noise emitters sound like a lonesome train whistle to alert passengers that the bus is on its way to make a stop.
Watching, don't forget that we do have the chat open, so if you have questions along the way, feel free to submit those in the chat. We will check those.
Looks like we got a couple passengers. Morning.
Good morning. And of course, this bus that we're riding is part of the Dominion Energy Electric School Bus Program, which all of those 50 buses are equipped with lap and shoulder belts. So we'll let the ladies get buckled before we get going.
Okay, we're all set, girls?
I believe so. Thanks for riding with us today. What do you all think of Jouley the electric school bus?
It's really quiet.
course, besides Jouley being electric, are there any other new features on Jouley that are different from some of the older buses?
One feature that's new on all of the Jouley electric buses is the Bendix IntelliPark system. It's got several features. One the drivers really love is how ergonomic it is. No longer do we have the old style push-pull valves. We'll show you in just a minute when we park Jouley how easy it is to set with just the tip of your finger. It also has a roll-away feature. So if a driver, for whatever reason, exits the bus and fails to apply the parking brake at a designated time interval, it'll apply itself, as long as it sees no input on the accelerator or the service brake, to prevent that accidental rollaway.
Talking about being on hills and whatnot, Jouley also has the hill hold feature. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so hill hold is a nice feature also. So if you're on any kind of a steep incline and you're making a stop, the system will take over through the ABS system and actually hold the vehicle without the effort of the service brake. And as soon as you hit the accelerator, it automatically releases the hill hold feature and you can pull away. So in that transition between holding your foot on the service brake and moving it to the accelerator, the vehicle doesn't give you any rollback.
Pulling back into our shop now, we're going to talk a little bit more about chargers here shortly, but can you tell us a little bit about the ones at our facility that we're getting ready to pull up to?
Yeah, so what we use here at our facility, we have one 60 kilowatt hour Proterra charger and 4 charging pedestals. So we can plug 4 buses in. From 0 to full, charge time on Jouley is approximately 3 hours. What our system will do, we can park 4 vehicles here overnight. It'll charge bus 1 as we're pulling into the bus 1 spot, and then we'll cascade down to the other 3 buses. So in a 12-hour period, we can charge 4 buses and have them ready to deliver the following morning.
Perfect. Yeah. Get off the bus and take a look
And
at
we'll
how.
show you real quick how easy the parking brake is to set. Touch of a finger. And we're set.
Okay, we're going to get off the bus and take a look at how to plug Jouley up. Yeah. Also come as well. Watch the cord there.
So instead of a fuel door, we have a charger port access door, and it's as simple as lining the connector body up and getting a green light.
Great.
And Jouley is charged.
And then this light will also turn green.
Yep. It'll go from green to blue. Blue means that it's in state of charge when it's blinking, and it'll go to solid blue when the bus is fully charged.